Have you ever had to make a decision for a loved one that felt logically correct, but emotionally deeply wrong? It's one of the most painful dilemmas a family can face. Hello, I'm John from Texas, United States, your friend and narrator of real stories. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story. Want to see your story told here? Then get in touch with us. Today, we're telling a story about that very struggle. The sign was carved in elegant, cheerful letters. Sunrise Meadows Assisted Living. It was meant to sound like a promise, a place of new beginnings. But for Sarah, sitting in the passenger seat of her brother's car, the words felt like a judgment. Today was the day they were moving their mother, Eleanor, into a home. A home that wasn't hers. The silence in the car was a living thing, thick with guilt and a grief so profound, it felt like they were driving to a funeral. In the back seat, her mother was a small, silent figure, clutching a worn leather purse, her gaze fixed on the unfamiliar, manicured landscape. At 82, a fall had shattered more than just Eleanor's hip. It had shattered the fierce independence that had defined her entire life. Her health had become too fragile, the risks of living alone too great. The decision had been a logical one, the only one, as her brother David kept reminding her. But logic offered little comfort against the raw, tearing feeling in Sarah's heart that this was a betrayal. This was not how her mother's story, their family's love story, was supposed to go. As they pulled into a designated parking spot, Sarah's mind reeled backward in time, ambushed by a memory so vivid it made her gasp. She saw her mother, not as the frail woman in the back seat, but as she was at 55, standing in the chaotic, joy-filled kitchen of their family home on Christmas Eve. Flour on her cheek, a laugh line for every wrinkle, orchestrating the beautiful chaos of her family. She was the sun around which they all orbited. That was her mother, the vibrant, capable woman who had built their world. Now, that same woman was being led into a building that smelled faintly of antiseptic and air freshener, her entire existence about to be condensed into a single, sterile room. The check-in process was efficient and impersonal. A friendly administrator with a practiced, compassionate smile handed them a folder of paperwork and a key. Room 21B. It sounded like a piece of evidence in a crime scene. David, ever the practical one, took charge of the moving boxes, his movements brisk and businesslike, a clear defense against the overwhelming emotion. Sarah walked beside her mother, her arm linked through Eleanor's, feeling the fine bird-like bones beneath her fingers. The hallway was long, carpeted in a swirl of beige and rose, and lined with identical doors. Other residents sat in armchairs in common areas, some watching television with vacant eyes, others just staring into the middle distance. Was this her mother's future? This quiet, passive waiting? This moment, condensing a whole life into a few boxes for a small, unfamiliar room, is heartbreaking. For those who have been through this, what was the hardest part about this process for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Room 21B was small. It had a bed, a dresser, a small armchair by the window, and a tiny kitchenette. It was clean and bright, but it had no soul. It had no history. As David began unpacking the boxes, the heartbreak of the task became almost unbearable. They had been forced to choose which slivers of a life to bring. A few framed photographs, a small stack of books, her favorite porcelain teacup. Each object felt like a refugee from a lost kingdom. Eleanor, trying to maintain a shred of control, directed them with a quiet, trembling voice. "Put the picture of your father on the nightstand, please, dear," she said to Sarah. "And the Bible, right next to it. Sarah followed her instructions, her hands shaking. She placed the photo of her handsome, smiling father next to the bed where her mother would now sleep alone. She placed the heavy Bible beside it, its worn cover a testament to a lifetime of faith. A faith that Sarah, in this moment, was struggling to comprehend. Where was God in this sterile room? Where was the compassion of Jesus in this process of being neatly put away? It felt cruel, a brutal final chapter to a life lived with such grace and love. She saw her brother struggling to arrange the few books on the small shelf, his broad shoulders slumped. She knew he was feeling it too. This was their mother, the woman who had kissed their scraped knees, who had sat through every school play, who had loved them with a fierce, unconditional power. And they were leaving her here, in a place where her meals would be served on a tray, and her life would be dictated by a schedule set by strangers. The forced cheerfulness finally broke. While David was arranging the toiletries in the bathroom, Eleanor sank into the armchair and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "It's just for the best, Mom," Sarah said, her own voice thick with unshed tears, the words sounding like a hollow lie. Her mother just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The time came to leave. It was the moment Sarah had been dreading all day. How do you say goodbye? David gave his mom a quick, tight hug, murmuring something about visiting tomorrow. Then it was Sarah's turn. She hugged her mother tightly, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender and love. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I'll call you tonight." "I know, dear," Eleanor whispered back, her attempt at a brave smile a gut-wrenching sight. And then they were gone. Walking back down that long beige hallway felt like the walk of shame. She couldn't bear to see her mother's future reflected in the eyes of the other residents. She got into the car, the silence now heavier than ever. As David pulled away from the curb, Sarah looked back at the building, at the window of room 21B. She imagined her mother standing there, alone, watching her children drive away. The carefully constructed dam of her composure finally burst. A sob escaped her, then another, and soon she was crying uncontrollably, the raw, ugly tears of a daughter who felt she had just committed the ultimate act of abandonment. David pulled the car over, his own eyes shining with tears. They didn't speak for a long time. There were no words that could comfort them. They had done the right thing, the logical thing, the only thing they could do to ensure her health and safety. But in their hearts, it felt like the most terribly wrong thing they had ever done. They had moved their mother into an assisted living facility, and in doing so, it felt as though they had just closed the final chapter of their own family's most precious love story. The drive back to Sarah's house was a blur of shared silent misery. The guilt was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made it hard to breathe. That night, Sarah lay in her bed, a victim of a familiar insomnia. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just worry. It was the gut-wrenching replay of her mother's brave, trembling smile as they walked away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the door to room 21B closing, and it felt like the closing of a tomb. The first week was a testament to modern family love, a series of dutiful, heartbreaking phone calls. "How are you, Mom?" Sarah would ask, her voice bright with a cheerfulness that felt like a lie. "Oh, I'm settling in," Eleanor would reply, her voice a little too steady, a little too brave. "The food is adequate, and the view from my window is nice." But between the lines, Sarah could hear the vast, echoing loneliness. She could hear the unasked question, "When are you coming back?" Sarah visited every single day. She would bring her mother her favorite tea, a new book, a piece of gossip from the neighborhood. Each visit felt like a desperate attempt to patch a hole in a sinking ship. She would sit in the small, sterile armchair in her mother's room, trying to fill the silence with chatter about her work, her husband, her life. And when the time came to leave, the goodbye was a fresh tearing of the wound. She would walk down that long beige hallway, feeling like a monster, leaving her mother in the quiet hum of the assisted living facility. During these visits, Sarah began to observe the world of the elderly home more closely. Her initial impression of a sad, waiting room for death began to give way to a more nuanced picture. It's so easy to judge a place or a situation from the outside, especially when we are hurting. Have you ever had your perspective on a difficult situation change completely once you got a closer look? Let us know in the comments. She saw the staff, the nurses and aides moving with a harried but often genuine kindness. She saw the immense patience required to coax a resident to eat, or to answer the same question for the 10th time. These were not villains. They were underpaid, overworked people doing a profoundly difficult job. She started to notice the other residents as individuals. There was a man who sat in the lounge every afternoon, meticulously working on a ship in a bottle, his hands gnarled but steady. There was a group of women who gathered to play cards, their laughter a bright, surprising sound in the quiet halls. These were not ghosts, they were people, still living, still finding moments of joy and connection in the final chapter of their own love stories. But it was her mother who surprised her the most. Eleanor, a woman of deep and abiding faith, was not just passively enduring her fate. Sarah saw her engaging in her own quiet ministry. Her mother's roommate was a woman named Mildred, who was often consumed by a fearful, dementia-fueled confusion. One afternoon, Sarah arrived earlier than usual. She paused at the doorway of room 21B, which was slightly ajar, and heard her mother's voice. Not the strained, brave voice from their phone calls, but a voice of calm, gentle authority. Peeking in, she saw her mother sitting by Mildred's bed, her Bible open in her lap. Mildred was agitated, picking at her blankets and murmuring about needing to go home. Eleanor wasn't arguing with her or trying to orient her to reality. She was simply reading from the Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Eleanor read, her voice a soothing balm. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." As she read, a visible calm settled over Mildred. Her frantic movements ceased, and she leaned back against her pillows, her eyes closing, her breathing evening out. Eleanor continued to read, her presence a quiet anchor in Mildred's stormy sea of confusion. This is such a powerful moment. It reminds us that our purpose isn't tied to a place. Have you ever seen a loved one find a new, unexpected purpose after a major life change? Tell us that inspiring story. Sarah stood in the hallway, unseen, tears streaming down her face. But these were not the tears of guilt and grief she had cried in the car. These were tears of awe. In that moment, she saw her mother, not as a frail victim of old age, but as a warrior of the spirit. Her kingdom had shrunk from a sprawling family home to a small, shared room. But her reign of love and care had not ended. She was still the matriarch, the caregiver, the heart of the family. Her flock was just different now. She was living her faith, truly, living the teachings of Jesus by caring for the least of these, right there in the elderly home. It was a revelation that fundamentally shifted Sarah's perspective. All their guilt, all their sorrow had been about what they thought they were taking away from their mother, her home, her independence. They had been so focused on the physical vessel of her life that they had completely underestimated the unshakable power of her spirit. Her mother's identity was not in her house. It was in her heart. The assisted living facility was not a tomb. It was simply a new parish, a new place where her light was needed. They hadn't abandoned her to a place of death. They had, by the strange and painful grace of God, moved her to a place that was in desperate need of her life. That evening, Sarah called her brother David. Her voice was different, and he noticed it immediately. It was calm, not with forced cheerfulness, but with a new, profound peace. "David," she said, "I need you to come with me to visit Mom this weekend, and I need you to see what I saw today." She told him about Eleanor and Mildred, about the Bible, about the quiet, powerful love she had witnessed in that small room. "We've been looking at this all wrong," she said, her voice full of a conviction that stirred him. "We've been so consumed by our own guilt, so focused on what Mom has lost. We haven't stopped to see what she is still giving. We've been treating her like she's a fragile doll, but she's the strongest person in that building. We need to stop visiting her like we're attending a sickbed, and start visiting her like we're coming to see the Queen in her new court." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, not of confusion, but of dawning wonder. For the first time since their mother's fall, Sarah felt a glimmer of real, unadulterated hope. The path forward was still uncertain, and the pain of their situation was still real, but her focus had changed. Their job was no longer to mourn the past, but to honor the present, and to support the incredible woman their mother continued to be, right where she was. That weekend, when Sarah and David walked into the assisted living facility, the air was different because they were different. They didn't walk with their heads down, braced for an emotional ordeal. They walked with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying not just a bouquet of flowers, but a new perspective. They found Eleanor in the common room, sitting with a small group of ladies, a half-finished puzzle on the table between them. When she saw them, her face lit up with a genuine, unforced smile. Instead of immediately pulling her away to the privacy of her room, Sarah and David greeted the other ladies by name, a gesture that surprised everyone, including Eleanor. "It's so lovely to see you again, Mildred," Sarah said warmly. "Mom told me you were feeling a bit better." The visit wasn't an interrogation about Eleanor's health or a somber remembrance of the past. It was a joyful participation in her present. They asked her about her new friends, about the stories she was hearing, about the daily dramas and small comedies of life in the elderly home. They listened, truly listened, as she talked about helping a nurse comfort a distressed resident, and how she had started a small, informal Bible study group with 3 other women on her floor. They saw a fire in her eyes they thought had been extinguished. The more she spoke, the more they realized the truth of what Sarah had seen. Their mother was not just a resident. She was a leader, a source of comfort, a spiritual anchor in a place that could easily be adrift in sorrow. Their guilt began to transform into a profound sense of pride. This new understanding changed everything. Their visits were no longer sad obligations. They became opportunities to support their mother's new mission. What a beautiful way to redefine family and community. What are some creative ways you've seen families stay connected and honor their loved ones in assisted living? Share your wonderful ideas in the comments. They started bringing extra cookies for her Bible study group. David, an avid gardener like his father, began helping to tend to the potted plants in the facility's sunroom, bringing a little more life and color to the space. They learned the names of the staff and thanked them for their hard work. They stopped seeing the assisted living facility as the place where their mother's life ended and started seeing it as the place where her final and perhaps most meaningful chapter was being written. The family was healing. the painful phone calls were replaced by conversations filled with purpose. Sarah would call and ask, "How was your Bible study today, Mom? What did you all talk about?" David would call and say, "I was reading in Proverbs and thought of you." They were finally connecting with the woman she was now, not the ghost of the woman she used to be. They realized that their family's love story wasn't contained within the four walls of their old house. It was a living, breathing thing that resided within their mother. She had carried the heart of their home with her, and she was now planting its seeds in this new, unlikely soil. They saw that her health, while still fragile, was no longer the central character in her story. The central character was her unwavering faith and her love for people. She was living out the most fundamental teaching of Jesus, to be a light in the darkness. Her small room, room 21B, was no longer a symbol of loss, but a beacon of hope on her hallway. Months passed, and winter arrived. As Christmas approached, Sarah had an idea. Instead of taking their mother out for a tense, awkward holiday meal, they would bring the celebration to her. They got permission from the facility director and organized a small Christmas carol service in the main common room. David brought his guitar, the one he hadn't played in years. Sarah and her children printed out song sheets. They brought trays of homemade cookies and hot chocolate. This scene is so moving. It shows that celebration and joy are not about the place, but about the people and the spirit we bring. What's a special memory you have of creating joy in an unexpected or difficult situation? On Christmas Eve, the common room, usually a place of quiet waiting, was filled with music and light. Residents who rarely left their rooms came out, drawn by the sounds of silent night. Sarah watched her mother, who was seated in the front row, her face glowing with pure joy. She was surrounded by her family and by her new community. Her two worlds merged into one. At the end of the caroling, Eleanor stood up, her Bible in her hand. Her voice was soft but clear as it filled the room. She read the story of the first Christmas, of a child born in a humble, borrowed place, a story of hope arriving in the most unexpected of circumstances. In that moment, Eleanor was not a resident of an elderly home. She was a matriarch, sharing the story of her faith. She was a living testament to the truth that home is not a place you live, but a love you give. The story of Eleanor and her family is a profound lesson in perspective. It teaches us that our purpose does not end when our independence changes. It shows that a life of meaning and service can be found in the most unexpected places. It is a powerful reminder that when we honor the spirit of our parents, instead of just managing their health, we allow them to live out their final chapters with the dignity, love, and respect they deserve. If this story of finding purpose in a new season of life has inspired you, please share that inspiration by leaving a like and subscribing to Stories Beyond 50. Your support helps us build a community around these powerful messages. And now, we invite you to share your own wisdom. Have you or a loved one ever had to make the difficult transition to an assisted living facility? How did you find light and purpose in that new reality? How can a family best support a parent during this challenging time? Your story could be a source of immense comfort and guidance for someone facing this journey right now. And if you're not ready to share, but you believe that our true home is the love we create wherever we are, just write the single word "home" in the comments below. Let us affirm together that our spirit is not confined by walls. We read and cherish every story, every word you share. Thank you for being the heart of this channel. God bless you, and we will see you in the next story.